There is a quiet moment that exists just beneath the noise of your thinking, a still and gentle awareness that has always been here, patiently waiting for you to notice it. You don't have to create it, you don't have to earn it, and you certainly don't have to chase it. It is already present, like the sky behind the clouds, untouched by the storms that pass through it. And yet, so much of your life has been spent believing that the clouds are the sky, that your thoughts are who you are, that the endless commentary in your mind is the truth of your existence. But what if that voice you hear all day long is not the master of your life, but merely a habit you've learned to obey? You see, the mind is a magnificent tool, but a terrible master. It was designed to solve problems, to analyze, to remember, to imagine. It was never meant to define you. When you get lost in your thoughts, what's really happening is that you've forgotten the silent presence that is aware of those thoughts. You've identified with the noise and mistaken it for your essence. And the moment you do that, you step out of peace and into struggle, out of clarity and into confusion, out of the present moment and into an endless loop of past regrets and future worries. Think for a moment about how often your mind takes you away from where you are. Your body may be sitting in a room, but your thoughts are replaying an old conversation, rehearsing a future argument, or judging something that happened years ago. In those moments, life is happening without you. The present moment, which is the only place where peace exists, is being traded for mental images that have no power except the power you give them. And yet, you were never meant to live as a hostage to your thinking. You were meant to live as the awareness behind it. There is a profound freedom that comes when you realize that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts come and go, but you remain. Emotions rise and fall, but you remain. Circumstances change, but you remain. The one who notices the thought cannot be the thought itself. The one who observes the feeling cannot be the feeling. This simple realization, when truly felt, begins to dissolve the grip that the mind has held over you for so long. You stop arguing with your thoughts, stop trying to fix them, stop believing that every mental whisper deserves your attention. You begin to watch instead of react, to notice instead of identify. The mind will tell you that you need to think your way to peace, that one more insight, one more analysis, one more explanation will finally set you free. But peace does not come from thinking more clearly about life. It comes from being present with life. It comes from stepping back into the quiet awareness that precedes every thought. The truth is, the more you chase peace through thinking, the further it seems to move away. Peace is not found at the end of a thought process. It is found in the space before the next thought appears. When you get lost in your thoughts, it is often because the ego has taken the driver's seat. The ego thrives on stories about who you are, what you've done, what was done to you, and what might happen next. It keeps itself alive by comparing, judging, defending, and fearing. It whispers that your worth depends on your achievements, your past mistakes, or other people's opinions. And as long as you listen to that voice as if it were the truth, you will remain trapped in mental noise. But the ego is not evil, it is simply incomplete. It is a collection of learned patterns, conditioned responses, and inherited beliefs. It is not your soul. Your soul does not speak in frantic sentences or anxious predictions. Your soul speaks in feelings of alignment, in gentle nudges, in a sense of quiet knowing. It speaks through peace. When you feel calm and connected, when you sense an inner yes that doesn't need justification, that is the voice of your soul. And the more you learn to listen to that voice, the less power your restless thoughts will have over you. You begin to trust the deeper intelligence that moves through you, the same intelligence that beats your heart and grows the trees without effort. Stopping the cycle of being lost in thought does not require force. You don't need to battle your mind or silence it through sheer willpower. That only creates more tension. Instead, it requires a gentle shift of attention. Each time you notice that you've been pulled into a mental story, simply return to the present moment. Feel your breath. Notice the sensations in your body. Listen to the sounds around you. These simple acts of awareness anchor you back into now, where the mind naturally quiets because it has nothing to argue with. The present moment is always neutral. It is your thoughts about the present moment that create suffering. When you are fully here, without labeling or judging, there is an underlying sense of okayness, even in the midst of challenge. Pain may exist, but suffering requires thought. Fear may arise, but panic requires imagination. When you stay with what is, instead of what your mind says about what is, you discover a resilience and peace that were never absent, only overlooked. There is also a profound compassion that emerges when you stop getting lost in your thoughts. You begin to see that much of your self-criticism has been fueled by unconscious mental patterns. You realize that you were never broken, you were simply identified with a voice that didn't know how to love you. As that realization deepens, forgiveness becomes natural. You forgive yourself for believing every thought. You forgive others for acting from their own unconsciousness, and in that forgiveness, a tremendous weight lifts from your spirit. You are not here to perfect your thinking. You are here to awaken from it. You are here to remember who you are beneath the noise. When you stop trying to control your thoughts and start observing them, they lose their authority. They become like passing clouds instead of solid walls. And in the open sky of your awareness, there is space to breathe, to feel, to live fully. The moment you stop resisting your mind is the moment it begins to relax. The moment you stop identifying with your thoughts is the moment you rediscover your true self. You were never meant to be trapped inside your head. You were meant to experience life directly, to feel the aliveness of this moment, to participate in the flow of existence with trust rather than fear. So the next time you notice yourself getting lost in thought, don't judge it. Smile gently as you would at a child who wandered off. Bring your attention back to now, this breath, this heartbeat, this moment, over and over again, without frustration, without demand. Each return to presence strengthens your connection to your soul and weakens the illusion that your thoughts control you. In time, you will notice that the gaps between thoughts grow wider, and in those gaps, you find a deep, abiding peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, but the peace of knowing that you don't need to. A peace that comes from trusting life, from aligning with the quiet intelligence within you, from remembering that you are not the storm, but the awareness in which the storm appears. And when you live from that place, you are no longer lost. You are home. And as you begin to rest more often in that sense of home, something subtle yet powerful starts to unfold within you. You notice that life no longer feels like a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The urgency to explain yourself, to defend your choices, to justify your past begins to soften. You realize that so much of your thinking was never about truth at all, but about control, trying to predict outcomes, manage perceptions, and protect an identity that was always fragile because it was never real to begin with. When that identity loosens its grip, a deeper strength emerges, one that does not need constant reinforcement. You may find that silence becomes less uncomfortable. Moments that once felt empty now feel full, alive with a presence that does not need words. In these spaces, you are no longer rehearsing who you should be or revisiting who you were. You are simply here, and here is enough. This is where wisdom lives, not in the noise of opinion, but in the quiet certainty that you are supported by something far greater than your individual mind. Call it universal intelligence, divine order, or simply life itself. Whatever name you give it, you can feel it when you stop arguing with what is. There is a sacred intelligence moving through you that has never been confused, never been anxious, never doubted its worth. It has guided you through every breath you have ever taken without requiring your conscious effort. When you learn to trust this intelligence, you stop demanding that your thoughts provide all the answers. You begin to sense guidance in unexpected ways, in a feeling of ease or resistance, in a sudden clarity that arrives without effort, in a quiet inner knowing that feels steady rather than urgent. This guidance does not shout, it invites. As you continue to disengage from compulsive thinking, you may notice old emotional patterns surfacing. This is not a step backward, it is a clearing. Thoughts that once operated in the background now come into the light of awareness, not to punish you, but to be released. When you observe them without judgment, they lose their emotional charge. You discover that you do not have to relive the past to heal it. Awareness alone is transformative. What you bring consciousness to cannot continue to control you unconsciously. You also begin to experience a gentler relationship with time. The past no longer feels like a courtroom where you are endlessly on trial, and the future no longer feels like a deadline you are racing to meet. Time becomes a rhythm rather than a threat. You understand that life unfolds in its own perfect sequence, and your role is not to force it, but to cooperate with it. In this cooperation, patience naturally replaces anxiety, and trust replaces doubt. This shift changes how you relate to others as well. When you are no longer lost in your own thoughts, you become truly available. You listen without planning your response. You see without projecting your fears. You love without attaching conditions. You recognize that every person you encounter is also navigating their own stream of thoughts, often believing them just as deeply as you once did. Compassion arises not as a moral obligation, but as a natural response to understanding. You may still think, of course you will. The mind does not disappear, but it no longer dominates the landscape of your inner world. Thoughts become visitors rather than rulers. You choose which ones to engage and which ones to let pass. This choice is not made through effort, but through awareness. The more present you are, the less seductive, unnecessary thinking becomes. And in this presence, you discover a quiet joy that does not depend on circumstances. It is not the excitement of getting what you want, but the contentment of wanting what is. This joy is stable, grounded, and deeply nourishing. It comes from aligning with your true nature rather than trying to construct a better version of yourself through thought. You were never meant to think your way into wholeness. You were meant to remember it. Beneath every anxious thought and every repetitive story is a stillness that has been with you since before you learned to speak. That stillness is who you are. When you return to it again and again, life begins to feel lighter, clearer, and more meaningful, not because it has changed, but because you have stopped getting lost. And in that remembering, you don't just find peace, you find freedom. And freedom, once tasted, invites you to live differently. You begin to sense that your life is not a series of random events, but a living expression of an intelligence that knows exactly what it is doing. You no longer feel compelled to micromanage every outcome with thought, because you have felt what it is like to be carried by something wiser than fear. This trust does not make you passive, it makes you present. It sharpens your intuition and softens your resistance. You act when action is needed, and you rest when rest is called for, without the inner conflict that once drained your energy. You may notice that the old habit of constant self-commentary begins to dissolve. The inner narrator that once described, evaluated, and judged every moment grows quieter, not because you silenced it, but because you stopped feeding it with belief. In its absence, life feels more immediate, more textured. Colors appear richer. Simple experiences, walking, breathing, listening, take on a subtle depth. You realize that happiness was never hidden in extraordinary moments. It has always been woven into the ordinary, waiting for your attention. As this awareness deepens, you may encounter moments when the mind tries to reclaim its old authority. It will offer familiar worries, replay old identities, and suggest that you are slipping, that you should be further along, more enlightened, more certain. When this happens, meet it with kindness. See the mind not as an enemy, but as a loyal servant that hasn't yet learned it can rest. Your gentleness teaches it far more effectively than resistance ever could. There is a profound humility that arises when you stop believing that every thought is important. You see how much of what you once defended so passionately was temporary, contextual, and shaped by conditioning. This humility does not diminish you, it frees you. You no longer need to be right to feel whole. You no longer need to be admired to feel worthy. You no longer need to control life to trust it. You begin to live from a deeper place, one that does not fluctuate with praise or criticism. From this place, creativity flows effortlessly. When the mind is no longer cluttered with fear-based thinking, inspiration has room to move. Ideas arise spontaneously. Solutions appear without struggle. You understand that creativity is not something you force into existence. It emerges naturally when you are aligned with your true self. You become a channel rather than a controller, allowing life to express itself through you in ways that feel authentic and alive. You may also find that your relationship with challenges transforms. Difficult situations no longer feel like personal failures or cosmic punishments. They become teachers, invitations to deepen your presence and refine your awareness. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this asking of me?" And often the answer is simple: to stay present, to remain open, to trust the process even when the outcome is unclear. In this openness, you discover a resilience that does not come from toughness, but from flexibility. Like water, you learn to move around obstacles rather than crashing into them. You bend without breaking. You adapt without losing yourself. This resilience is born not from thinking your way through problems, but from staying connected to the stillness within you that is untouched by circumstance. As you continue to live this way, the boundary between inner and outer begins to soften. You sense that the peace you cultivate within yourself subtly influences the world around you. Your presence becomes calming. Your words carry less urgency and more truth. You are no longer trying to change others. You are simply being, and in that being, you invite others into their own stillness. This is how real change happens, not through argument or persuasion, but through alignment. You come to see that getting lost in thought was never a flaw, but a phase of forgetting. And remembering is always possible, right now, in this breath. Each moment offers you a doorway back to yourself. You do not need special conditions, perfect circumstances, or a quiet life to walk through it. You need only awareness, gently returning again and again to the truth of who you are. And who you are is not confined to a story, a role, or a set of beliefs. You are the space in which all of that appears. You are the awareness that watches thoughts rise and fall like waves on the surface of the ocean. You are the depth that remains still, no matter how restless the surface becomes. When you live from this knowing, life unfolds with a sense of grace. Not because everything goes your way, but because you are no longer at war with what is. You move with life rather than against it. You trust the unfolding. You listen more than you analyze. You feel more than you fear. And in this gentle surrender to the present moment, you realize something quietly miraculous. You were never lost at all. You were always here, always whole, always guided. The thoughts were just passing clouds. And now, at last, you see the sky. And seeing the sky does not end the journey, it softens it. You begin to walk through your days with a lighter step, not because life has suddenly become easy, but because you are no longer carrying the extra weight of resistance. You stop arguing with reality in your mind. You stop replaying moments that cannot be changed. You stop borrowing trouble from a future that has not yet arrived. In their place, there is a quiet companionship with the present moment, as though life itself is walking beside you, not ahead of you, not behind you, but with you. You notice how much energy was once spent trying to maintain an image, trying to be seen a certain way, to be understood, to be validated. That energy begins to return to you. It becomes available for living, for creating, for loving. When you are no longer lost in thought, you do not need to prove who you are. Your presence speaks more clearly than any explanation ever could. There is a subtle authority in this simplicity, a calm confidence that comes from alignment rather than effort. Gradually, you realize that many of the thoughts that once dominated your inner world were never truly yours. They were borrowed from culture, family, past experiences, and collective fear. You carried them faithfully, believing they defined you. But as awareness dissolves their hold, you begin to feel what it is like to think freshly, to respond rather than react. You choose thoughts the way you would choose food. Not everything that appears before you needs to be consumed. In this clarity, the body begins to relax as well. Tension that was held unconsciously starts to unwind. Breathing deepens. Sleep becomes more restorative. There is a sense of being at home in yourself, as though you have stopped abandoning your own inner space. Healing happens not because you force it, but because the conditions for healing are finally present. When the mind stops racing, the body remembers its natural state of balance. You may find yourself drawn to stillness, not as an escape, but as nourishment. Moments of quiet become invitations rather than voids. You sit, you breathe, you listen, not waiting for something to happen, but appreciating what already is. In these moments, you touch something timeless, something that does not age or worry or strive. It is the same presence that looked out through your eyes when you were a child, before thought became so convincing. You recognize it now as your true self. From this recognition, gratitude arises effortlessly. Not gratitude as a practice technique, but gratitude as a natural response to being alive. You notice the miracle of simple things, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of your breath, the fact that you are here at all. When thoughts no longer obscure your perception, life reveals itself as generous, supportive, and profoundly intelligent. Even pain, when it appears, is met differently. You do not pile stories on top of it. You allow it to move through awareness, knowing it is temporary, knowing it is not who you are. This allowing transforms pain into information, into movement, into release. Suffering loses its permanence when you stop narrating it. What remains is a quiet strength that does not harden you, but opens you. You begin to trust silence as much as you once trusted thought. You understand that answers often come not when you are thinking hardest, but when you are listening deeply. Life speaks in synchronicities, in subtle shifts, in feelings of resonance. The more present you are, the more clearly you hear. And the guidance you receive is always aligned with peace, never with fear. As this way of being becomes familiar, you realize that awakening is not a dramatic event, but a gentle remembering that unfolds moment by moment. It is the choice to come back to this breath, this step, this heartbeat again and again. There is no finish line, no final arrival. There is only deeper presence, deeper trust, deeper freedom. And freedom, you now understand, was never about controlling your thoughts. It was about realizing you are larger than them. You are the awareness in which they appear, the quiet intelligence that does not need to be managed or improved. When you live from this truth, you stop getting lost because there is nowhere else to go. You are here. You have always been here. And in this here, life unfolds exactly as it should, whole, meaningful, and infinitely alive. And as this recognition settles more deeply into your being, you begin to sense a subtle reverence for life itself. Ordinary moments no longer feel ordinary. There is a sacredness in washing your hands, in hearing a familiar voice, in watching the day slowly turn into evening. When you are not lost in your thoughts, you are not rushing past your life. You are inhabiting it. You are participating in the quiet miracle of existence, moment by moment, without needing it to be different from what it is. You also begin to notice that fear loses much of its authority. Fear depends on imagined futures and remembered pain. And when you stay present, its fuel supply weakens. This does not mean fear disappears entirely. It means it no longer decides for you. You feel it arise, you acknowledge it, and you let it pass through awareness without building a home around it. In doing so, courage becomes less about forcing yourself forward and more about staying open when the mind says to close. There is a tenderness that grows in this openness. You become kinder with yourself, especially in moments when old habits return. Instead of seeing distraction as failure, you see it as an invitation to return. Each return strengthens your awareness. Each moment of noticing is a moment of awakening. Nothing is wasted. Even getting lost becomes part of remembering, a gentle reminder of the direction you are moving. Over time, you sense that life is responding to this inner shift, not because you are controlling it with your thoughts, but because you are aligned with its natural flow. Opportunities appear without strain. Conversations deepen without effort. Decisions feel clearer, not because you have analyzed them thoroughly, but because they feel right in your body, calm in your heart. You learn to trust this felt sense, this quiet yes or no that arises from stillness rather than anxiety. You also realize that presence is contagious. When you are truly here, others feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they sense the space you bring into the room. A space where they do not need to perform, impress, or defend. A space where they, too, can rest for a moment from their own thinking. In this way, your inner work becomes a gift, not something you preach, but something you embody. As the need to constantly think diminishes, joy becomes simpler. You laugh more easily. You find delight without searching for it. Joy stops being a reward for success and becomes a natural expression of aliveness. You understand that happiness was never meant to be postponed until conditions improve. It lives in the present moment, waiting patiently for your attention. You may still plan, still reflect, still imagine, but now these activities serve life instead of replacing it. Thought becomes a tool again, useful and respectful of its role. It steps back when not needed. It no longer insists on narrating every experience. In the quiet that follows, intuition has space to speak, and intuition always speaks in the language of peace. Eventually, you stop asking how to stop getting lost in your thoughts because the question itself dissolves. You see that being lost was simply a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. You were never the thinker. You were the awareness listening to the thinking. And awareness, once recognized, cannot be unrecognized. It may be temporarily overlooked, but it is always here, waiting without impatience. So you continue, moment by moment, not striving for enlightenment, not chasing stillness, but honoring what is already present. You breathe, you notice, you return. Life unfolds. And in this unfolding, There is a deep, unshakable knowing that you are supported, guided, and whole. You are not behind. You are not missing anything. You are not meant to live inside your thoughts. You are meant to live as the awareness that holds them gently, without fear, without urgency, without getting lost. And in that gentle holding, you find what you were looking for all along. Not an answer, not a solution, but a home within yourself that was never absent, only forgotten. There is a quiet voice within you that has never hurried, never panicked, never doubted its own worth, and yet most of your life you have been taught to ignore it. You were trained to think your way through existence, to analyze every feeling, to predict every outcome, to rehearse every conversation before it happens, and replay every moment after it is gone. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, life became something you observed rather than something you lived. You began standing just outside the doorway of the present moment, peering in with your thoughts, convincing yourself you would enter once you felt more certain, more prepared, more in control. But life does not wait for certainty. Life only unfolds where presence lives. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is fear wearing the mask of responsibility. It is the ego's attempt to secure a future that does not yet exist and to repair a past that is already gone. And while the mind is busy negotiating with time, the soul waits patiently in the only place it has ever known now. The soul does not speak in arguments or strategies. It whispers through feelings of expansion and contraction, through peace and unease, through the gentle knowing that arises when you stop trying to manage the universe and allow yourself to participate in it. You were not created to be a problem solver of your own existence. You were created to be an expression of life itself. Yet the moment you identify solely with your thoughts, you step out of the river and begin trying to control the current from the shore. You start asking, what if, and what should I do, and what will they think? As if life were a test you might fail rather than a dance you were meant to enjoy. The mind will always find another question, another scenario, another reason to delay joy. It was designed to think, not to lead. When you allow it to dominate, it becomes a tyrant that demands constant vigilance and offers no peace in return. Notice how overthinking keeps you safely distant from the risk of fully living. If you are busy analyzing your feelings, you do not have to feel them. If you are rehearsing the future, you do not have to show up now. If you are dissecting the past, you do not have to forgive it. Overthinking promises protection, but it quietly steals your aliveness. It keeps you suspended in a mental waiting room, forever preparing for a life that is already happening without you. The truth is simpler and far more liberating. You do not live in your thoughts, you live in awareness. Thoughts come and go like clouds across an infinite sky, but the sky itself is never disturbed by their passing. When you confuse the clouds for the sky, you believe that every thought deserves your attention, your belief, your emotional investment. But when you remember who you truly are, the awareness observing those thoughts, they lose their authority. You see them as mental events, not commands, suggestions, not truths. This is where freedom begins, not in controlling your thoughts, but in releasing your attachment to them. You do not need to stop thinking. You need to stop believing that thinking is who you are. The ego thrives on identification. It wants you to say, I am anxious, I am confused, I am broken. Because once you wear those labels, you live inside them. But awareness simply says anxiety is present, confusion is visiting, a story is being told. And stories lose their power the moment you stop calling them your identity. Overthinking often disguises itself as self-improvement. It tells you that if you just think a little more, plan a little better, understand yourself a little deeper, you will finally arrive at peace. But peace is not a destination reached by mental effort. It is a state revealed by mental surrender. You do not find peace by rearranging the contents of your mind. You discover it by remembering that peace is what remains when you stop rearranging. Life is not asking you to figure it out. Life is asking you to feel it, to feel the warmth of the sun without narrating it, to listen to another human being without preparing your response, to walk, to breathe, to love, without translating each experience into a mental report. The present moment does not need your commentary. It needs your presence. And presence is the doorway through which joy enters. When you overthink, you live in fragments. A piece of you is in the past, reviewing what should have been said. A piece of you is in the future, rehearsing what might go wrong. And very little of you is here, where life is actually offering itself. Healing begins the moment you gather yourself back from those timelines and rest fully in now. This is not resignation, it is power. The power to meet life as it is, rather than as your fears imagine it to be. You may notice that when you stop overthinking, there is a brief sense of vulnerability, as if you have stepped out from behind a shield. That vulnerability is not weakness, it is authenticity. It is the raw, unfiltered experience of being alive. The ego resists this because it cannot control it, but the soul recognizes it as home. In that openness, intuition awakens. Decisions become simpler, not because life becomes predictable, but because you are no longer arguing with it. You were never meant to think your way into worthiness. You were born worthy. You were never meant to earn the right to exist peacefully. Peace is your natural state. Overthinking is learned. It is conditioning passed down through fear-based systems that taught you to measure, compare, and judge yourself into compliance. But beneath all that noise is a stillness that has never been damaged, never been confused, never been afraid. It has been waiting patiently for you to stop searching and start listening. When you trust that stillness, you stop micromanaging your life. You begin to act from alignment rather than anxiety. You speak when it feels true, not when it feels safe. You rest without guilt. You move without forcing. And paradoxically, life begins to flow with greater intelligence than anything the mind could have planned. Synchronicities appear not because you control them, but because you are no longer blocking them with resistance. Forgiveness becomes possible here, too. Overthinking keeps wounds alive by replaying them. Presence dissolves them by seeing through them. You realize that clinging to resentment is not strength, it is bondage. There are no justified resentments, because every resentment ties you to the very thing you wish to escape. Forgiveness is not about condoning the past, it is about freeing your future from its grip. When you forgive, you are not saying what happened was acceptable. You are saying you choose peace over perpetual punishment. The mind will tell you that letting go is dangerous, that without constant thinking you will lose control. But control was never the goal, freedom was. And freedom arises when you trust the intelligence that beats your heart, grows your cells, and moves the planets without your permission. That same intelligence knows how to live through you if you allow it. So the invitation is simple, though not always easy. When you notice yourself overthinking, do not fight it. Observe it. Gently step back into awareness. Feel your breath. Feel your body. Feel this moment. Not to escape life, but to enter it fully. Each time you do this, you loosen the grip of the ego and strengthen your connection to the truth of who you are. You are not here to survive your thoughts. You are here to experience life, to love, to learn, to expand, to remember. The mind is a beautiful tool, but it is a terrible master. Let it serve you without defining you. Let presence lead. When you do, you will discover that life was never withholding itself from you. You were simply thinking instead of living. And the moment you stop letting overthinking keep you from experiencing life is the moment life rushes in to meet you whole, vibrant, and ready exactly where you are, exactly as you are now. And as you remain here, breathing into this moment without demanding that it become anything else, you may begin to notice something subtle and profound. The world feels closer. Colors soften and deepen at the same time. Sounds arrive without urgency. Even silence begins to speak. This is not imagination. This is what life feels like when it is no longer filtered through constant mental resistance. Presence is not dramatic. It is intimate. It is the quiet recognition that you are finally meeting existence face to face rather than through the lens of thought. The mind has spent years convincing you that clarity comes from effort, that wisdom is earned through struggle, that insight arrives only after analysis. But the deepest truths have always revealed themselves when effort relaxes. Think of the moments in your life when you felt most whole, not when you were solving a problem, but when you were laughing without restraint, watching something beautiful without labeling it, holding someone you loved without needing words. In those moments, thinking fell away and what remained was being. That is not accidental, that is instructive. You see, overthinking fragments energy. It scatters your attention across imagined timelines and borrowed fears. Presence gathers energy. It consolidates your life force into a single point of awareness. And when energy is gathered rather than scattered, it becomes powerful. This is why stillness feels restorative and why silence heals in ways explanation never can. You are not empty when you stop thinking. You are full. As you learn to trust this fullness, A new relationship with uncertainty begins to form. You stop treating the unknown as a threat and start recognizing it as possibility. The mind fears what it cannot predict, but the soul thrives in mystery. Creativity, love, and growth all require space that overthinking tries desperately to close. When you loosen your grip on needing answers, life surprises you with insights that arrive fully formed, without strain, without effort. You may notice that intuition grows stronger in this space, not as a loud directive, but as a quiet alignment. Choices feel cleaner. You are no longer choosing between fear and desire, but between contraction and expansion. The body becomes an ally, offering signals the mind once dismissed. A tightening becomes a warning. A lightness becomes permission. You realize that wisdom has always been communicating with you. You were simply too busy thinking to listen. And gradually, compassion deepens, not only for others, but for yourself. You begin to see how much of your overthinking was an attempt to protect a younger version of you, one that learned early on that safety came from vigilance. When you recognize this, judgment dissolves. You stop trying to fix yourself and start honoring the intelligence behind your coping. Healing does not demand that you become someone new. It asks that you stop fighting who you have been. From this compassion arises gentleness, and from gentleness, courage. The courage to be seen without rehearsing, to speak without editing your soul, to rest without justifying it, to say no without explanation and yes without apology. Overthinking thrives on justification. Presence requires none. When you are aligned, your being is explanation enough. This is how inner freedom expresses itself, not as escape from responsibility, but as release from unnecessary burden. You still plan when planning is needed. You still reflect when reflection serves growth. But you no longer live inside your head as if it were a prison cell. Thought becomes a visitor, not a landlord, and you begin to inhabit your life rather than observe it. In this inhabiting, something extraordinary happens. Gratitude emerges naturally. Not forced gratitude, not gratitude as a spiritual strategy, but genuine appreciation for the simplicity of existing. Breath becomes miraculous. Time slows just enough to be felt. Even challenges lose their sharp edges, revealing themselves as movements within a larger harmony you are learning to trust. You start to understand, not intellectually, but experientially, that life has never been against you. It has been responding to the energy you brought into each moment. When that energy is fear-based, life feels heavy. When it is presence-based, life feels cooperative. This is not magical thinking. It is alignment. You are not controlling outcomes. You are cooperating with reality. And so the invitation continues, moment by moment. Return. Return from the noise. Return from the stories. Return from the endless commentary about who you should be and where you should be by now. Return to the quiet knowing that you are alive, aware, and enough. Each return is an act of self-remembrance. Each return weakens the illusion that you are your thoughts. You do not need to wait for overthinking to disappear, to live freely. You simply need to stop letting it decide when you are allowed to be present. Life is not on hold. It is happening now, softly and persistently, inviting you in. And every time you choose presence over rumination, you answer that invitation with your whole being. This is not the end of thinking. It is the end of thinking as an obstacle to living. From here, thought serves life rather than obstructs it. And you discover, with a gentle astonishment, that the life you were trying so hard to figure out has been patiently waiting for you to experience it fully, openly, and without delay. And in this widening awareness, you begin to sense a deeper rhythm beneath the surface of things, a rhythm that was never frantic, never rushed, never demanding that you keep up. It has always been keeping you. This rhythm does not speak in deadlines or expectations. It moves like breath, like tides, like the quiet certainty of dawn arriving without argument. When you attune to it, urgency dissolves. You realize that much of what you called pressure was simply resistance to the natural timing of your own unfolding. There is a profound relief that comes when you stop treating life as a series of problems to be solved and begin experiencing it as a process to be trusted. The mind has been trained to believe that vigilance equals virtue, that if you relax your grip, something will fall apart. But what actually falls away is tension. What loosens is the constant self-surveillance that has kept you from resting inside your own being. You discover that you can be attentive without being anxious, responsible without being rigid, engaged without being consumed. This is where grace quietly enters, not as a reward for spiritual effort, but as a natural consequence of alignment. Grace is what flows when you stop interfering with your own becoming. It is the ease that arises when you are no longer at war with uncertainty. And in that ease, you begin to sense guidance not as instruction, but as inclination, a gentle leaning toward what feels true, honest, and alive. The ego will still appear, thoughts will still arise, but they no longer carry the same gravity. They pass through awareness like weather across a landscape that knows it is larger than any storm. You no longer rush to correct every thought or interpret every feeling. You allow experiences to complete themselves without interruption. And in doing so, you give life permission to teach you in ways thinking never could. There is a maturity that develops here, a spiritual adulthood that no longer seeks validation through certainty. You stop needing to be right to be at peace. You stop needing answers to feel secure. You begin to trust that understanding unfolds at the pace of readiness, not demand. This trust softens you. And in your softness, you become resilient. You may notice that relationships change in this space. When you are present, you listen differently. You are no longer waiting to respond. You are available to receive. Conversations deepen. Silence becomes comfortable. You stop projecting your fears onto others and start meeting them where they are. And because you are no longer trying to manage how you are perceived, authenticity emerges naturally. People feel this. They relax around you. They sense the absence of agenda. This authenticity is not performative. It is grounded. It does not announce itself. It simply is. And it becomes a quiet invitation for others to drop their own defenses. In this way, presence becomes contagious. Without trying to heal anyone, you become a space where healing feels possible. Without offering advice, you offer clarity. Without effort, you offer peace. As this way of being stabilizes, you begin to recognize the difference between effort and intention. Effort strains, intention aligns. When you act from intention rather than effort, you do not force outcomes. You participate in them. You do your part and release the rest. This release is not indifference, it is faith. Faith in the intelligence that orchestrates far more than the mind can comprehend. You start to see how much energy was once spent resisting what is, resisting emotions, resisting timing, resisting yourself. And as that resistance fades, vitality returns. Not the restless energy of striving, but the steady energy of engagement. You wake up with a sense of openness rather than obligation. You move through your day with curiosity instead of control. Even fatigue takes on a different quality. It becomes a signal to rest, not a failure to push harder. And perhaps most quietly transformative of all, you begin to experience yourself as part of something larger without losing your individuality. You are not dissolving into abstraction. You are integrating into wholeness. You feel connected without being absorbed, unique without being separate. This is the paradox the ego could never resolve, but the soul understands effortlessly. In this understanding, fear loses its narrative power. It may still arise, but it no longer defines direction. You feel it, acknowledge it, and continue moving from a deeper center. Courage here is not bravado. It is presence in the face of uncertainty. It is choosing to remain open when closing would feel safer. It is trusting life enough to meet it as it arrives. And so the arc continues, not toward an ending, but toward a deepening. You are not arriving at a final insight. You are settling into a way of being, a way that does not require constant self-correction or mental rehearsal, a way that allows life to be lived from the inside out. You are learning, moment by moment, to step out of overthinking and into experience, to exchange noise for knowing, to trade control for connection. And in this exchange, something essential is restored, the simple, profound joy of being alive without explanation. This is not a technique, it is a remembering. And the remembering continues gently and persistently. Each time you choose presence over preoccupation, each time you trust awareness more than anxiety, each time you let life touch you directly without interference. The rhythm carries you forward now, not hurried, not delayed. exactly on time. And as this rhythm carries you, you begin to sense how little effort it actually takes to be yourself. There is no strain in authenticity, no labor in presence. The exhaustion you once felt did not come from living too much, it came from thinking too much about how to live. When that mental weight softens, energy returns in unexpected ways. You feel lighter not because circumstances have changed, but because you are no longer dragging every moment through the narrow doorway of judgment. You start to notice how often the mind asks for guarantees before allowing you to feel joy. It wants proof that happiness will last, that peace will not be interrupted, that love will not be lost. And when such proof cannot be found, it withholds permission. But joy does not require contracts. Peace does not demand certainty. Love does not wait for safety. These qualities arise when you are present enough to receive them, not when you have secured them intellectually. In this receiving, time begins to feel different. It no longer presses against you like an adversary. Moments stretch just enough to be inhabited. You are not rushing through experiences to get to the next one, nor clinging to them in fear of loss. You are allowing them to arrive, unfold, and pass complete in themselves. This is the natural intelligence of life moving through you when you stop interrupting it with commentary. You may notice that even your mistakes take on a different texture here. They lose their harshness. They become information rather than indictment. When you are present, you learn quickly and gently. You adjust without shame. You grow without self-punishment. Overthinking once convinced you that harshness was necessary for improvement, but awareness reveals that kindness is far more effective. Growth accelerates when resistance dissolves. There is a humility in this awareness, but not a diminishing one. It is the humility of recognizing that you do not have to orchestrate every detail of your existence to be worthy of it. You belong here simply because you are here. The universe did not make a mistake in creating you, and it does not require constant oversight to justify that decision. When you trust this, you stop standing in judgment of your own life and begin participating in it more fully. Gradually, a quiet confidence emerges, not the confidence of knowing what will happen, but the confidence of knowing you will meet whatever happens with presence. This confidence is unshakable because it is not dependent on outcomes. It rests in awareness itself. You know now that whatever arises can be felt, whatever is felt can be held, and whatever is held can pass. This knowing frees you from the tyranny of anticipation. You become more responsive and less reactive. Instead of immediately translating experience into story, you stay with sensation. You feel before you conclude. You listen before you label. And in that pause, that sacred space between stimulus and response, wisdom lives. This is where choice becomes conscious rather than conditioned. This is where freedom expresses itself in everyday moments. Even ambition changes here. You may still desire, still create, still move toward what inspires you, but the desperation fades. You no longer chase fulfillment as if it were somewhere else. You create because it feels true, not because it promises validation. You act because you are inspired, not because you are afraid of falling behind. Action born of presence carries a different energy, clean, focused, and sustainable. You also begin to see how overthinking once kept you disconnected from your own body, lost in thought. You miss the signals of tension and ease, fatigue and vitality. Now, awareness brings you back into relationship with yourself. You notice when to pause. You sense when to move. You honor your rhythms rather than forcing them to match someone else's expectations. This attunement is not indulgence, it is intelligence. In this intelligence, you rediscover trust, not blind trust, but lived trust. Trust that life responds to openness. Trust that clarity emerges when needed. Trust that you do not need to rehearse every possibility to be prepared. Preparedness here is presence. It is the willingness to meet life as it arrives rather than insisting it conform to your predictions. And as this trust deepens, something tender unfolds. Gratitude without reason. You find yourself appreciating moments that once went unnoticed. A breath, a glance, a pause between words. Gratitude becomes less about circumstances and more about awareness itself. You are grateful not because everything is perfect, but because you are here to experience whatever is present. This is how overthinking loosens its hold, not through force, but through replacement. It is replaced by intimacy with life, by direct experience, by the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where you are, without apology or anticipation. And in this satisfaction, you realize that the peace you were seeking through thought was always available through presence. The journey continues, not as a climb towards some ideal state, but as a settling into what has always been true. You are not late, you are not behind, you are not missing anything essential. You are awakening to the simple, profound reality that life is lived now, and you are already in it. And so you keep returning, gently, patiently, again and again. Each return deepens the remembering. Each remembering softens the mind's grip. And with every breath taken in awareness, you step more fully into the experience you were never meant to think your way into, but to live.